Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to the third episode in this series, which this series is the Mercenary Guides. Last episode we did the Act 2 Mercenary, and I am remiss for leaving out the cryptic,
Hello there.
the Crescent Moon weapon for the Act 2 Mercenary as an interesting option as well. But I think the reason why I left that out, honestly, is because I feel like if you're going for Static Field, you're probably going to go with one of the other options, which we're going to talk about one of those other options here today. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to be talking about the Act 3 Mercenary. Now, the Act 3 Mercenary used to be just the worst mercenary that you could possibly get, but these days, thanks to the changes that they've made to the Act 3 Mercenary, the Act 3 Mercenary has really come alive in some time. Basically, we have three different versions now. We have a fire, ice, and a lightning. And all of them can be very good for utility. The ice is very good for crowd control. The fire is very good for additional damage and attack rating through the enchant. So we can just type enchant here. The enchant honestly makes him very powerful. And then of course the lightning is also extremely powerful because the lightning has access to static field, which is an extremely good utility skill. So basically all three of these have very good utility, and it depends on what you want to do with them. It's also important, though, to talk about the fact that of the three of these, one of these is actually inferior to the rest, and it actually has to do with the fact that the other two can be broken, and one of them can't. So fire can be broken. Ice cannot be broken. This is something that is unfortunately an issue when it comes to ice. Can be broken. Now, if you are a character who has access to things like conviction, or if you're using lower resistance curse, or maybe you're running a freaking infinity polearm on yourself. Maybe you're like a self-wheeled infinity Javazon or something, right? Or Spirazon. Well, then you can basically break lightning and you can basically break fire, and then negative resistance can, of course, take over from there once the resistance is broken. And they don't have access to, Sunder Charms and stuff. And they also don't get access to your Sunder Charms. So it's important to note this. Now, unfortunately, that does put ice in an unfortunate predicament, which is basically that ice is the most difficult to break. In the majority of situations, not only does ice not get broken by conviction or lower resistance, but the very few times that it does get broken, it's basically useless. Like for the most part, it's like 10% of the time you might get a breaking ice resistance. But for the most part, it literally cannot be broken. And it usually has to do with the fact that monsters just have ridiculously high resistances to ice, like upwards of like 140 resistances to cold. And so when you subtract your like your measly 35% whatever that you can muster to try and break that resistance with conviction and lower resistance, well, it still ends up above 100, so you still have like 105, right? And because it's still over 100, basically they're still not going to get broken. And this unfortunately does make the ice a little bit less effective in a lot of ways than the other two. And it's also important to note here that the ice's main draw is the fact that it has crowd control. And it's also important to note that the crowd control does not work on a large variety of monsters. This includes immune to cold monsters, monsters that are immune to any slows or chills, basically of any kind. So for the unfortunate side effect is that while the ice mercenary can be quite powerful, and I've actually set up ice mercenaries before, the downside is that number one, ice resistances really can't be broken no matter what kind of character you are. On top of that, crowd control does not really work on a large variety of monsters. So if the monster is immune to cold, then it doesn't work. If the monster is like a death lord that's immune to slows and chills, then it doesn't work. If it's a gloam, it doesn't work. If it's a doll, it doesn't work. Like there's a lot of monsters that crowd control effects just don't work onto. And because also there's a huge number of monsters that are immune to cold, this list is kind of ridiculous. And so for the most part, I think you'll find that the Ice Mercenary is probably the least of them in terms of and what he can achieve, which really leaves the Fire and the Lightning versions. Now we're going to be talking about these, and we're going to be talking about basically how you set these guys up. And as I talked about before in some previous videos, there's basically four main ways to set up your mercenaries. Number one is for the Merc, which is basically setting up the mercenary to be the best Merc he can be. And then number two is the tank Merc, and unfortunately there is no tank Merc for this because this Merc is not very tanky. I would not advise setting up this particular Merc to be a tank Merc. Yes, he can survive, and yes, he can survive quite well, but he survives quite well by staying out of the way and using crowd control and just kind of like generally not being in the fight. That's basically his thing. So this is basically a big red X. Don't worry about trying to set this guy up for tanking. If you need a tank Merc, you're probably going to be better off with the Act 2 or the Act 5 mercenary. Even the Act 1 mercenary might work better as a tank than the Act 3 one. Number 3 is utility. Utility is a very big thing for these. These guys are almost always utility. Even when they're not utility, they're still utility. So setting up the Merc to be useful to you. Basically that's a lot of what you do when you set these guys up is you're setting them up to be useful for you. And that's really the best thing about these guys. And then the other thing, the last one is boss killers. So I don't necessarily think that these guys are ever going to be boss killers either. They will dish out significant damage and they'll help you, but boss killers they are not. Since they do not do physical damage, since they do not do range damage, they cannot apply open wounds, they cannot apply crushing blow, they also have no way to apply poison effects, and so they cannot stop monster regeneration, and they cannot bring down large amounts of HP like a crushing blow Merc can. So this again is an X. So basically the only two ways that you can set up an Act 3 mercenary are basically for utility and for the mercenary to be the best Merc that he can possibly be, which pretty much leads you to utility. It just depends on how much utility you want them to be set up for. Now, the first thing we're going to be talking about, or the first version we're going to be talking about, is the Fire Mercenary. The Fire Mercenary is a very interesting one, and wouldn't you know it? There is one, Thadar. All right, what's up, Thadar? So the Firemercs have Firebolt, which is a pretty pathetic skill, Fireball, which does pretty significant AoE damage, which is actually very effective, and then they have Enchant, which can actually be ridiculously powerful. Now, I actually have a character completely set up with a Fire Mercenary right now, and there's a couple different ways that you can potentially set up a Fire Mercenary. One of them is to enhance the Enchant as much as possible, which basically involves just simply getting as much plus the skills as you possibly can, and I actually found out that that's actually not the case. So it depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to get the damage output? Or is your goal to get the attack rating? So if your goal is to get the attack rating, adding skills is going to get you that. So beefing up the mercenary with as many skill points as you possibly can is the right way to go. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, basically, your best setup is going to look like this, which is Flickering Flame, Hexfire, Phoenix, and you're also going to want an Ormus Robe with Enchant on it. That's going to be your best setup for an Enchant setup. Keep in mind that the Spirit Monarch shield does have to be ethereal because he does not have enough strength to wear a non-ethereal version, and you don't want to have to put strength on this guy. It's not something that you want to do. Now, if you put a Fire Facet in the Hexfire, a Fire Facet in the Ormus Robes, and you wear a Flickering Flame with a Spirit Monarch, you will have a total of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, which is plus 11 to Enchant, which will bring him to a massive level 48 Enchant, which is pretty darn sweet. It's 454 fire damage, which is not bad, and 443% attack rating. And 443% attack rating is a lot of freaking attack rating. It is a lot. I mean, you can see just from like my measly 85%. We walk outside real quick. He will enchant me. I do believe he needs a monster to activate his enchantment, which is something that you do have to keep in mind. So as soon as a monster is discovered, he'll start cycling through his skills, and then he'll start throwing enchant up. And it's really obvious when you're enchanted because obviously you get the red attack, right? And so now we have a nice little red attack, and I've got fire damage, and I also have massive amounts of attack rating, more than what I had previously. Previously I only had 85, and now I have 461, which is actually kind of ridiculous considering I don't have any decks or equipment on whatsoever. That's enough attack rating to pretty much do what I want. Now, you might think that 462 damage isn't really a lot, but I've actually managed to utilize this quite effectively on a Necromancer build, which I actually already have up, if you want to take a look at that. But basically what the Necromancer build is it's essentially utilizing this fire damage to multiply out with my minions. So basically how this works is if I have, say like 15 Skeleton Warriors, I also have one Golem, and then I have about 21 revives, and they're all melee characters. Then I have about 37 monsters that are attacking at any given time. Enchanting them gives them a massive amount of 443% attack rating, and also gives them 454 fire damage. So I take that 454 to fire damage, and I multiply that by my minions, which means I'm dishing out 16,798 fire damage per rotation, which is a lot. And you can essentially augment this by, of course, adding in negative resistances, which does affect your minions and other things. You can also do this on a druid to a lesser effect, but because the druid has less minions, of course, you'd be talking about, 3 wolves plus, 5 spirit wolves plus 1 bear. Plus yourself, of course, gives you 10 times 452, which is going to give you a total of 4,520 damage per rotation. Now, the damage isn't like the most important thing, but for the Necromancer, it is. For melee characters, that huge attack rating bump is the most important thing, and that's how you get like massive amounts of attack rating for your character. Now, you might I said earlier that this is the best setup for attack rating, and it's not the best setup for damage. And I actually found this out is that basically adding in more fire facets is actually better than using flickering flame. So in this case, if you want to maximize for damage output of enchant, you actually need to get less skills. And utilize something like a Harlequin Crest Shako with +2, with one fire facet, which will actually up the damage and lower the attack rating, which is an interesting way that you can go. Now, it's important to kind of talk about the faster cast and the faster hit recovery of these minions. We're going to talk about some other setups too that you can do with these guys. But first off, let's pull up a chart real quick on faster hit recovery. So faster hit recovery, breakpoints, D2R. All right, we're going to pull this up here, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So first off, when you take a look at faster hit recovery breakpoints, you'll notice that the worst player character in the game is the sorceress at a 15 frame breakpoint, which is absolutely terrible. And her 15 frame breakpoint is awful. She can get locked really easily with this, and she can easily die if she's sitting at 15 frames. And a lot of people who play sorceresses know exactly what I'm talking about. And you know that you need about at least a 60 or 86% faster hit recovery to fix this, so that your frames go up to at least around 7, so that you're not like eminently killable on a regular basis, right? Well, if you take a look at the Act 3 Mercenary right here, the Act 3 Mercenary is even worse, with a 17 frame breakpoint on his faster hit recovery. Now, it does go up relatively quickly, and with just a measly 32% faster hit recovery, you can get up to 11 frames. But don't let this fool you into thinking that you don't have to build this, because if you don't build some faster hit recovery on your Act 3 Mercenary, there's a very good chance he's just going to get locked in a faster hit recovery loop, and he's going to die. So building faster hit recovery on these mercenaries is actually really important. And if you are a necromancer like me, then you don't really have to worry about it too much, because obviously when the necromancer is playing with his giant army, the minions kind of just hanging in the back and doesn't really have to worry about much. Also, the Spirit Monarch shield takes care of 55% of that faster hit recovery relatively easily, and brings you up to a very nice and comfy 10 frames, which is a hell of a lot better than the original 17 frames that you started with. And with just a little bit more faster hit recovery here or there, you're golden. Now, you might be wondering, well, what am I talking about? Like, well, obviously, I'm not getting faster hit recovery from Ormus Robes, and I'm not getting faster hit recovery from Flickering Flame, and you don't get any faster hit recovery from Hexfire either. And that's right. So if you use 2 spirits, which is a common configuration for this, you do lose +1 skills here, and you also lose a facet. But you do get, obviously, some faster cast and faster hit recovery, which is going to bring you up nicely to 110%, which is very easily going to shove you into the, as you can see, 8-frame bracket, which is perfectly fine for an Act 3 Merc. So running 2 spirits is actually really nice. However, another way that you can do it, instead of running the spirits, is instead of running Ormus robes, you can run Kay Hagen's wisdom. This mercenary doesn't need resistances. So things like Viper Magi are just kind of wasted on this character. Also, faster cast rate is a little bit complicated, and we'll talk about that as well. But basically, Kay Hagen's Wisdom is pretty much your ultimate plate for this particular character because it offers 20% faster hit recovery, 20% faster cast, +1 skills, and of course a socket which you can throw a facet into. So in this particular case, now I'm at 75% faster hit recovery without the spirit. And with the spirit, I am sitting at 130% faster recovery, which throws me very close to the 7-frame breakpoint. Now, one thing that I like to do with this particular character is instead of putting a facet here to get him to that 7-frame breakpoint, I'll take a 7% faster hit recovery jewel and I'll put it inside the Kay Hagen's Wisdom. This will make it so that he can hit that upper faster hit recovery breakpoint, which helps out a ton with him. And of course, if you have 35% faster cast here, 35% faster cast here, and 20% faster cast here, you're looking at a very nice faster cast of 90% faster cast, which is pretty sweet. This setup is really if you just want to enhance the enchant as much as humanly possible. And even without these, to be honest with you, you can see the enchant still doesn't do like too terrible. It's 416% attack rating, and it's 348 fire damage. Now, if you put those back on, we go to 443% attack rating and 454 fire damage. So it really just depends on how you want to set up your enchant. Like, do you want your enchant to be at its maximum fire damage? Are you concerned about beefing up the enchant at all? If you're not concerned about beefing up the enchant, if you're trying to speed up the actual NPC's attack speed and whatnot, then that's another thing. Let's go take a look real quick at his faster cast rate as well. So he has some very interesting faster cast breakpoints, and one of the things that I tried to figure out when it comes to the breakpoints on this particular NPC is can you even reach some of the faster cast breakpoints? And the answer to the question is actually no, you can't. So this is the breakpoints right here for faster cast. And we have the Iron Wolf right here. So here's the Iron Wolf down at the bottom. And as you can see, they start out at a 17-frame faster cast rate, which is pretty terrible considering the Sorceress starts out at 13. And you can really only reliably get them to the 86% faster cast rate level, which is, as you can clearly see, with our character, we are currently hitting 90%, right? With our Kay Hagen's Wisdom and our Spirit, we're hitting 90% faster cast. You could also hit the 90% faster cast with Ormus robes, but you do lose, well, you don't really lose too much faster hit recovery, so you're actually pretty good there. You're still well over the faster hit recovery breakpoint that brings you to at least 8 frames. You're just not going to be able to hit the 7 frames. And you're still hitting basically the maximum faster cast rate for this mercenary. And you might be wondering, like, what am I talking about? Why can't the mercenary hit the last breakpoint, which is 138? Well, it's basically impossible. Even if you run the highest faster cast rate equipment that you possibly can in all slots, you cannot hit that breakpoint. And here, let me just demonstrate this. So assuming that you have a 35% faster cast sword, and assuming you have a 35% faster cast shield, you are then left with faster cast options for your remaining 2 pieces of equipment to try and hit that mystical 138% faster cast. And you're pretty much only left with head options, and the best head option is Griffin's Eye, which is a terrible option for this particular character, but let's go ahead and add that anyway. So 25% from Griffin's Eye. And then, of course, you can also potentially get a body piece, which Skin of the Viper Magi is the highest that you're going to get there, which is 30%. So once you add in your 30% and your 25% from Griffins, you can see that you only hit 125%. So no matter what you do, you're not going to hit that last breakpoint, so don't even bother with it. You just need to hit the 90% breakpoint or the 86% breakpoint, which is from the 11 frames, which is right here. Now, it's also important to note that you don't need a 35% FCR Spirit and you don't need a 35% FCR Spirit Sword. Because you have a little bit of leeway here, you got about 4% leeway. You can shave a couple points off of this and be fine. So if you do have a spirit that only has, you know, say like 31% faster cast, or you got 2 spirits that are 34 or whatever, you're fine. You're still going to hit the 86% faster cast rate breakpoint, and you're good. And this is, of course, to make sure that he's dishing out as much damage as possible. When it comes to this particular character, if you're trying to prioritize damage output, Fireball is your main bet, and you want to make sure the Fireball is casting as fast as possible, obviously. So hitting that 90% faster cast is very important. Plus, the skills can, of course, bring up the Fireball damage, but if you use things like Hexfire, while he will gain more plus the skills and a fire facet, he will also lose faster cast, and you kind of have to like compensate for that. Otherwise, he's going to have a much slower attack speed. However, more negative resistance will definitely help him out a lot when it comes to dishing out damage. So he's going to get 15% negative resistance from the helmet if you have a nice perfect one. And of course, you also get the really sexy fire aura, which is a very good perk of having access to this particular mercenary, because of course he basically gives you a permanent fire resistance aura, which is going to help out your fire resistance tremendously. But basically the max that you're going to be able to get from him is 15 here. You got 5 here, which is 20. And even if you set him up for like a Hexfire with 1, that's only 25. And then you could put like some sort of shield over here, maybe a Phoenix, and you could get him another 28, which is going to stack him out to... Boop, 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 boop. Sure. Where is it? Negative 22%? No, where's this Phoenix? This Phoenix is on? Okay, Phoenix is on... It's not really calculating the fire resistance, right? Oh, yeah, I remember there being an issue with this, where sometimes the Phoenix, when it was imported in, would not be properly adding the negative fire resistance. This was a bug that occurred, and I can't remember exactly how to fix that. I think it involved creating a new Phoenix from scratch as opposed to importing the Phoenix. But basically, it's got 22% negative fire resistance here, and of course it would be 25 if this was a perfect. And then, of course, you get the additional 20, which is 25, 35, 45, and then 53. So you'd have about negative 53% fire resistance. And if you, in that combination, if you used it with, say, like a character that can break fire resistances, like a Conviction Paladin or a lower resistance Necromancer, then that's a pretty solid amount of negative resistances to make sure that he's dishing out a decent amount of damage. The main problem with this setup is that once you put all this on, your faster cast rate goes down to 20%, and you're pretty much bubkiss on trying to attack quickly, which is why a more balanced approach is usually required, where you're basically setting up something like K-Hagen's, a Spirit, and then, you know, maybe you've got your Hexfire in here with a negative fire resistance gem, or you could just go with speed and just try and get as much speed as possible, which is 2 spirits, Flickering Flame, and K-Hagen's. I mean, honestly, there's really not a lot of like crazy things that you can do to increase the damage of this mercenary much more, because he's limited on gear slots, and you do need a particularly large amount of faster cast to bring him up to a level where he's actually attacking quickly enough to dish out the damage to kill the monsters. And that's really all there is to it. And if I take him somewhere, just take him to Frigid Highlands real quick. And of course we immediately find fire immunes. Let's go to Crystalline Passage. It's probably not fire immunes here. I don't know. Maybe. And of course I do have it on a player's 8, don't I? I do have it on player's 8. Yes, I do. Now, when it comes to these mercenaries, they're not tanks, obviously. They're not going to be able to tank everything and stay alive. So you do have to obviously help them. You're not going to pick this for like a sorceress. You're not going to pick this for like a character that basically has no defensive capability whatsoever in terms of like a tank. You could pick it for an Amazon, because Amazons of course have the Valkyrie and whatnot. But for the most part, when it comes to these characters, they're not really meant to be standalone characters. They're meant to be supportive characters. And let's see if we can get him to murder some bats real quick. As you can see, he does a pretty decent job murdering like just about everything with his fire damage. It's not like too difficult as long as the monster's not immune to fire. And of course, when you're in Player's Aid, things do get a little bit more spicy, but hopefully you'll be there to support him. In general, this character is actually kind of interesting when you set him up with a teleporter that can stun. It's actually something that I played around with for a while, and I'm not sure if I can show you guys this, but is my character still here? Pyrotechnic. This is my character. This is my Mosaic Sin. I know some of you guys absolutely hate Mosaic Sins, but this is my Mosaic Sin from the season when Mosaic Sins were introduced. And I played around with a lot of Merc options, and I felt like my Merc was pretty much useless for the most part because of the way that my character worked. But I eventually set up with a Fire Merc. And you might be asking, well, why the Fire Merc on the Mosaic Sin? Well, I come to find out I actually really enjoyed the fact that his fireball hit multiple targets basically when I jumped into a pack of monsters. So one of the things that I would do is I would basically go down and let me just go ahead and generate my, let's see, here's Z, and we need, I just need Cobra Strike so we can demonstrate this. So let's build up some charges real quick. Let's get our ice charges. And so basically what I would do is I would teleport in all the time. Where's my dragon flight? And when you teleport into a pack of monsters, notice that the mercenary teleports with you, which is really cool. And when the mercenary teleports with you, he starts firing his fireballs basically at point-blank range within the pack of monsters. And of course these monsters are immune to fire, which doesn't help me very much, but essentially what I was doing was I was basically using him as another AoE damage source so that when I teleported inside of a pack of monsters, he would start firing his fireballs, and he would start dishing out a rather large amount of damage to the monsters in the pack as I was going, which was an interesting way to utilize him. Of course, he wasn't really ever in very much danger, because as I teleported into a pack, I generally froze them. And because you freeze the monsters as you teleport in, there's really no danger to the mercenary, because you're basically just keeping everything nice and frozen. And so once you get him in there, he starts really just like piling in the fire damage and dishing out large amounts, of course. And it also doesn't hurt that I get all the additional attack rating, which is certainly not a slouch. I love having the additional attack rating. And there's just a lot of fun ways that you can potentially utilize the new mercenaries. This is just one such way that you can utilize the new mercenaries. And another such way that you can utilize the new mercenaries is one that I talked about earlier, which is my Fire Merc on my Fire Necromancer. And basically what my Fire Necromancer does is he summons an army. And when he summons an army, the mercenary enchants the entire army, basically making the army have a significant amount of damage output. And this is what I was talking about earlier, is that I went with an additional fire facet. Of course, I don't have perfect fire facets. If I did have perfect fire facets, I would be much better. And I don't have a perfect max 15% Ormus robes or 20% with the fire facet. So this character is a little less perfect than the one that I showed you earlier with the perfect equipment. But basically how this works is I'm utilizing Hexfire, Ormus robes, and Harlequin Crest Shako to get 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, so plus 9 plus the skills. And the reason why I went with less plus the skills here, even though it's only 1 less plus the skills, is because I get an additional fire facet, which adds additional damage to the enchant. So if you use this setup, as opposed to the one I showed earlier, you can get a little bit of extra fire damage on the enchant. Honestly, you just need perfect fire facets to really max it out, though. So you need 5% here. You would have a perfect Ormus robes with a 15%, with a 5%, which is going to get you 25. And then you would get another 5% here, which would add up to a total of, what is that? 5, 25, or 20, right? So 25, and then 30. So a 30% skill damage, which is going to give you a pretty big bump in your enchant damage for only losing essentially 1 plus to skill here. And of course you can see he's still capped out on all resistances just fine, and he has not as much negative resistance, but I'm not really so much worried about him dishing out damage as I'm worried about him enchanting my army. And basically how this works is on the Necromancer you go summon your army, and let me go summon my army real quick. Let me get my golem up. And we're going to summon up a massive army of the undead. And what he does is he enchants them all. So as he's doing his work and he's enchanting my entire army, every single one of my army skeletons is getting a 401 fire damage added to their abilities. I'm utilizing my lower resistance curse, which of course helps his damage, and it also helps my damage, and my little minions damage. And I, of course, I'm also utilizing the Flame Rift to increase that even further. So I basically have as much elemental damage as I can through the use of the Enchant Merc, which actually works out surprisingly well. And it makes it so that my mercenary, my minions, can basically take on even physical immunes, because it doesn't matter whether they're physically immune, because the monsters don't. I'm not dishing out physical damage primarily. Like, that's not my main source of damage. So in this particular case, you can set up the mercenary to do some very interesting things. In this particular case, I'm setting up my mercenary to support my army, not necessarily setting him up for faster cast. As you can see, he only has 55% faster cast, which isn't really the best amount. However, with 55% faster cast, he's still fairly useful. He's just a, he's now a cog in the giant wheel of my army, which is certainly not terrible. And that pretty much does it for the fire mercenary. I do feel like there's some other things that we can talk about when it comes to utility. And there's utility options, and I definitely recommend some of these utility options. So let's talk about some of these utility options that you could potentially do for the mercenary. So instead of a spirit sword, one of the biggest utility things that you can potentially do is you can add on a different sword, and there's a couple different options for swords that will give you some interesting utility. I don't have all of them here. I'm going to mention some of them briefly, but first off is Plague, which is a very solid option. Plague gives +1 or +2 skills. I recommend that you get the +2, obviously, for this particular character, because skills is very important for the way that this character works. And essentially what you do is you get your cleansing aura. So now you have a mercenary that has the fire aura, of course, from the flickering flame, and then you've also got the cleansing aura from the sword, and you can make this even better. So how would you make this even crazier? Well, you can add on a bramble, which I don't have a bramble on me right now, but I could always go snag one from one of the other characters. But basically, when you utilize this character in a specific way, you can set up the character with basically a maximum number of auras. And this one. And having access to basically, like freaking 4 auras is certainly not a terrible thing. And of course, she has the bramble on right now, so we're going to take that and throw that in here. Now, if you set up your mercenary, your Act 3 mercenary properly, you can potentially have access to 1, 2, 3, 4 auras at the same time. 4 is a pretty high amount, and Bramble is just one of the options that you can use for auras. You can also potentially utilize a Phoenix Shield. A Phoenix Shield is also going to give you Redemption, which is going to help keep your mercenary alive, and it's also going to suck up corpses. And setting up this character this way is going to get you a very nice cleansing aura, a aura that gives you thorns, the fire resistance aura, and of course also the actual redemption aura as well. And if you're bougie and you've got like $1,000 million, you could also potentially utilize a Last Wish, which Last Wish will also give you the Might aura. Granted, it also gives him Fade, which isn't really going to do much for his resistances, but it will give him some damage reduction. For the most part, the stats on Last Wish are completely wasted on this particular character, and I would be remiss in saying this because it's an extremely expensive item. You really can't make it in a Phase Blade because he doesn't have enough dexterity to actually utilize the Phase Blade version, which is a big issue. So if you try to give him the Phase Blade version, you have to give him increased dexterity items to be able to hit that point to be able to put on the sword, which is a pain in the butt. So if you're going to make one for him, it's probably going to be in a crystal sword or something, or like a dimensional blade, something that he can actually equip. Now, you could potentially utilize something like a Kay Hagen's with, I don't know, like a really nice dexterity jewel or something in it to try and hit that point. But the point that I'm trying to make is that he can't utilize the Phase Blade version without really having some form of dexterity increase. So keep that in mind. But in this particular configuration, and now he has freaking Last Wish, which is obviously your Might aura, Bramble, which is your Thorns aura, Flickering Flame, which is your fire aura, Phoenix, which is your redemption aura. Now, you might not want to do the redemption aura, in which case you just probably throw the friggin' Spirit Shield back on him. There's really no other options. He can't use an Exile. But in this particular configuration, you're also getting Enchant. So you're getting a massive bonus to attack rating, a massive bonus to your damage output, your physical damage output, Thorns, which is going to help you tremendously to reflect damage away from you, resistances, and then, of course, you can also potentially suck up corpses. If you're a Necromancer, you're probably not going to want to use Phoenix. The configuration, the utility that you can potentially get out of this character is insane, especially when you consider the fact that he also has Enchant. So you get Enchant, Might Aura, Thorns, Resistance Aura, and potentially Redemption as well, which is a pretty sick combo. Another potential option that you can use for his weapon slot is the Sanctuary Aura weapons. There's actually two of them. One of them is a Phase Blade, so it might not work, but the other one is, I believe it's Lawbringer. And Lawbringer has the Sanctuary Aura, which is another aura that you could potentially add into the equation. Sanctuary basically just knocks back undead monsters away from him, and it might not necessarily be the best aura in the world, but it is another aura that you can potentially add in. The other added benefit of the Lawbringer, which I don't have on me right now, but another added benefit of Lawbringer is it does have slain monsters rest in peace. So if you are doing, say, Neelathak, and you're tired of your mercenary killing monsters and causing them to corpse explode and kill you, Lawbringer is an option that you can put on your mercenary while you are fighting Neelathak to prevent him from causing that issue, which is actually a pretty good option as well. Most of the other mercenaries cannot use Lawbringer. Only the Act 5 mercenary can use Lawbringer as well. So the Act 1 and the Act 2 mercenary cannot use Lawbringer, which means that the only way to add Slain Monsters Rest in Peace to a Act 1 or 2 monster or mercenary is Tyrael's Might, which is the only option. It's a kind of a hard one to get your hands on, especially if you're offline. All in all, the Act 3 Fire Mercenary is absolutely amazing. All right, and I feel like it's time we probably move on, and we're going to move on to the ice version. And I've got setups for all of these so far, so there's an ice one here. Now, I talked about the ice mercenary being one of the least best options for mercenaries in this particular setup, and honestly, it's true. The Ice Mercenary just doesn't really have the same oomph as the other two because it's very difficult to break the resistances, and there's a lot of monsters that are immune to them. Even if you are a Necromancer that has lower res, or if you're a Paladin, like a Conviction Paladin, there's a couple different Conviction Paladins. But basically, you just don't really get the same oomph out of the Ice version that you do out of the others. Let's go ahead and grab the Ice one real quick. Now, the Ice version has Ice Blast, which is a very good single target damage output, Chilling Armor, which does make them a lot tankier than some of the other options, and they also have Glacial Spike, which Glacial Spike is a very nice AoE freeze, which can lock down a large group of monsters at one time. It's actually pretty effective for locking down monsters. Generally for this type, you want to go with speed or utility, but you're really looking at things like basically 2 Phoenixes. Of course, I seem to be missing a Phoenix. Am I missing a Phoenix? That's okay. I can steal one of the Phoenixes from one of the other characters. Things like, of course, Dual Spirits. Kay Hagen's is a very good choice. Obviously, this character can still do all of the utility options. Like, for instance, you could still do Bramble. You cannot, however, do Crown of Ages. Crown of Ages with 2 cold facets is out of the question because it's a 174 strength item, whereas Nightwing's Veil is only 86 strength. Now, it is important to note that if you do go with a Chains of Honor, Chains of Honor does have strength on it, and the Chains of Honor might let you put on the... it might not be enough, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, it's one strength point shy, but it's close. So the strength that you get from Chains of Honor is not quite enough, but you can potentially get it set up high enough to give yourself the Crown of Ages. I just don't really think it's worth it in the grand scheme of things because the damage output that you're losing by putting the strength enhancing equipment on is going to just like balance things in the wrong direction. So K Hagen's is pretty much the best choice for this particular build. It's going to give you the cold facet, which is very nice. You could also potentially go with an Ormus Robes that has the right skill on it. I don't really think the Ormus Robes with, say, like Glacial Spike or Ice Blast is really the right choice, because Ice Blast and Glacial Spike are both important. And so if you, like, forego one for the other, I just don't really think it works out for the best. Also, you really need the faster hit recovery to help keep them alive. And at that point, you pretty much are just going to put a Phoenix Shield on them. Let's go steal a Phoenix Shield real quick, since I seem to be missing one. I tried to set up all these characters in advance, and I promise I went through like hours of creating these characters, getting everything set up, trying to get everything right, and still ended up messing up somehow. So, yay! That's just how it works. It's just how it works sometimes. Sometimes you just mess up, and there's nothing you can do about it. People make jokes about me always looking through my characters for my equipment, but I mean, you try having like 300 characters with stuff all over the place. All right, so this is generally the best setup for this particular character as far as damage output goes, because you're going to hit that the faster cast breakpoint of your 90%, which is what you're looking for. You're also going to hit the 130% faster hit recovery, which means that if you take the cold facet out of the armor and you put in a 7% faster hit recovery jewel, you'll be able to hit the highest faster hit recovery breakpoint if you want to, or you can focus on just simply getting the damage output. It's one way or the other. But this will get you negative 10% enemy cold resistance, 25% cold skill damage, and it's going to give him the fastest attack speed that he can get. He's actually pretty effective versus monsters that are not cold immune. I'm trying to think of a good place to go ply his trade on non-cold immunes. Eldritch is always cold immune. Let's try Holds of Pain. Let's go see if he can take out some monsters in Halls of Pain. Of course, I'm going to be no use to this guy because I'm not set up for anything, but... as you can see, he has the ability to lock down a large group of monsters at one time. He's certainly no slouch with it, and Glacial Spike's AoE ability allows him to lock down monsters relatively effectively. As long as the monsters are not immune to his cold effects, he's actually pretty good. On top of this, the armor that he has, due to the chilling armor, does give him 17,000 armor value, which is kind of insane, and makes him actually a lot tankier than the other options. He's never going to be a tank, so to speak, but he's definitely the least likely to die in most situations because he has the ability to freeze targets, and he also has a huge bump in his defensive capability through the chilling armor effect, which gives him some pretty nice damage output by being able to just sit there and just lock down targets. Now, this particular mercenary is also capable, obviously, of all of the options. So you could potentially utilize Voice of Reason as an early option, which is actually really cheap. It does have negative 24% enemy cold resistance. And you will lose, obviously, your faster cast, your faster recovery, and, of course, your +2 to skills. But you'll gain negative 24% enemy cold resistance and cannot be frozen, which isn't too shabby. And basically, this is going to get you up to a negative 34% enemy cold resistance, which will make it a little bit easier for him to take out monsters in general. The damage output, unfortunately, drops a little bit, but I think you'll find that because of the increase in negative resistances, it does make him a lot easier to just simply lock down targets. One of the things that you have to remember about cold damage and chilling damage in general is that your resistance, like what your resistance is, directly affects how long a freezing effect works. For instance, Ice Blast says it lasts for 37.7 seconds, but it doesn't last for 37.7 seconds. It's nowhere near that. And when a monster has like 95% cold resistance, and you're dealing with the duration decreases from hell difficulty and whatnot, it ends up being far less than that. Same thing with Glacial Spike, which is only 5.7 seconds. But the thing is that if you're utilizing negative resistance actually helps with this by reducing the resistance of the monster, which of course in turn also increases the duration back to its full value or closer to its full value, essentially. This is why when you PvP with sorceresses who have like negative 200% enemy cold resistance, the chilling effect, like if you don't have cannot be frozen, the chilling effect lasts forever because they applied it with a huge negative resistance penalty, which basically prevented your resistance from being able to decrease the duration, which is important. And while I do throw a lot of shade on this guy, I do feel like this guy can be particularly useful as long as you are dishing out damage to monsters that are not immune to cold and not immune to the freezing effects, because he can basically just sit there and just rip monsters to shred in relative safety. Like I said, not only can he freeze the targets, but he also has a ridiculous amount of armor comparatively to the other versions, which makes it so that he can actually tank attacks, which is neat. I do think that his damage output could be a little bit better. He only does about 1,000 damage per Ice Blast, and he does 1399 per Glacial Spike. And Glacial Spike is AoE, which is nice, but he basically like flips back and forth between these two. Trying to think here. One way that you can help keep him alive even more, of course, is Phoenix. We talked about that earlier. And, of course, you can also throw a Plague on him. Personally, I really like swapping out the Spirit Sword for the Plague option, because the Plague option not only gives him, of course, the Cleansing Aura, which I absolutely adore, by the way, but it also gives him the ability to potentially cast lower resistance when he's struck. It does take some effort, and he's not always in combat, but basically having access to lower resistance is better than not having access to lower resistance. And it's really about the Cleansing Aura. He gets the +2 skills, same as Spirit, but he does lose access to the faster hit recovery and the faster cast rate, which is unfortunate. But, I mean, it's certainly not terrible to have Cleansing Aura in the mix. I really like having Cleansing Aura. I cannot understate how amazing it is to have a permanent Cleansing Aura on your character. And the only two characters that can really do it, outside of Cure, which is only a little tiny, little bitty thing, is the Barb Merc and the Act 3 Merc. And the Act 3 Merc, of course, can utilize the Plague Sword as his main hand weapon with relative ease, and get really good damage out of it. The +2 skills is perfect for him, and honestly, having the Cleansing Aura keeps him alive as well. And then on top of that, if he gets into a situation where he's getting hit, he also casts lower resistance, which of course increases his damage output because he is, of course, a cold Merc. Now you might be asking, well, who is going to utilize the cold mercenary? Honestly, I think the cold mercenary is best utilized on characters that already have access to some sort of negative resistance equipment, because it helps out tremendously if you've got conviction. It helps out tremendously if you have, say, lower resistance and whatnot. But unfortunately, if I was a Necromancer, I would go with the Fire Mercenary because I really like that enchant. If I was a Paladin, I would probably go with the Lightning or the Fire for the Static Field or the enchant. Again, I really feel like, unfortunately, as neat as it is to have the Ice Mercenary and as cool it is as it is that he can freeze the monsters and lock them down, I just don't really think he's the best choice if you're going for one of these mercenaries. So let's talk about the last on the list, which is the Lightning Mercenary. I know this one's going to go for a little while because we've got 3 different configurations to cover, and the 3 different configurations are pretty different. In this particular case, we're talking about the Lightning Mercenary, and the Lightning Mercenary has some really interesting abilities now that they fixed him. One of them, of course, is Static Field, which is going to be the focus of pretty much what we're talking about. So Static Field is an amazing ability that causes the monster to basically lose a percentage-based amount of HP, depending on their current resistances, and it actually goes down more if their resistances are lower than if they are higher. It's actually a whole thing. I could talk for a while on this, but I don't really think it's a good idea. The best thing to remember is that the more negative resistance that you have, the better Static Field works. And of course, the higher the level of Static Field, the further it goes and it hits more targets. So having a high level Static Field means that it's going to go for a particularly large distance. In this particular case, it goes 17.3 yards without any additional equipment, which is insane. So setting him up with gear, the best way that you could potentially do this is pretty similar to some of the others, which is K. Higgins. However, instead of a Spirit Sword, you're generally going to go with Crescent Moon because Crescent Moon has an amazing negative 35% enemy lightning resistance, which is what you really want. So running Crescent Moon with K. Higgins is going to get you a negative 40% enemy lightning resistance, which is amazing. And then you're going to top that off with an additional negative lightning resistance, which comes from an Ethereal Griffin's Eye. If you get your hands on an Ethereal Griffin's Eye, you're going to throw that on him, and you're going to get an additional negative 25, which is going to bring you to negative 65% enemy lightning resistance, which is kind of insane. And then from here, it really comes down to whether you want survivability, like of the Phoenix Shield, which is going to help keep him alive by giving him the ability to heal himself and suck up corpses, or just faster cast rate in general, which is probably what you're going to want to go with. As you can see, his faster cast rate is stuck at 80%, which is a little bit shy of our breakpoint that we were talking about earlier with the 86%. But it's also important to note that because he's a chain lightning character and he's utilizing lightning's breakpoint is 78 at 13 frames. And this means that he is hitting the highest breakpoint really, or the second highest breakpoint that he can hit for lightning with this setup. And with a negative 65% lightning resistance, it's actually pretty powerful. This particular character I highly recommend for characters that are lacking in AoE damage, because basically what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to, number one, have static field, which is going to dish out a massive amount of AoE damage to everything nearby. And as you can see, it's currently 20 yards, which is basically the entire screen. And then on top of that, you also get lightning, which is going to go through targets, and it's going to dish out pretty good damage that way, too. In fact, let's go ahead and take him over to, I'll say Frigid Highlands real quick. And he already annihilated those monsters. Let's see how he does against Eldritch over here. As you can see, he's already hit static field and basically staticked all the monsters down to half. It didn't really take very long for him to do that. He does have a little bit of issue basically spamming charged bolts sometimes, which is not really effective at long range. But if you're at close range, it's actually quite good. So if you're teleporting around with, say, like a, what's the term? Like, say, a Mosaic Sin or something like that. If you're teleporting around with a Mosaic Sin, you're going to be able to utilize the effect of him teleporting around with you, and the charge bolts will actually dish out a massive amount of damage at close range, as long as he fires them at close range. The main issue is that you really can't get him to fire them at close range when he has basically control over himself, because he's too busy trying to do his own thing. Another issue with him is that he doesn't really, as you can see, he likes to walk away from targets. It seems to be a big thing with him, like he walks away from targets. So it doesn't really help that he spams charge bolts. But I tell you, the static field that he does is worth it, because he will basically just static field everything constantly, unlike your own personal static field bot, and the static field will do a massive amount of damage to everything nearby. I mean, whenever you get into combat, doesn't matter what you're doing, if you're going into combat, he's going to be static fielding, and once he starts static fielding, everything is going to be relatively low. I mean, we've got monsters over here on the outside, and you can see he just static field the entire group of monsters. It's like having your own little private pocket sorceress to static field for you whenever you need it. And if you apply additional things, this is where things get rather interesting. When I said that I could talk about static field for a long time, is that if you apply additional negative resistance to a monster, you can actually go a lot lower than 50%. So a lot of people think that the maximum negative resistance, or the maximum negative that you can get, is 50% total. And let me kind of dispel this real quick, because this is kind of important. So for lightning, because it has static field, this is what people know, is that in normal difficulty, you can bring a monster all the way down to like 1% HP, right? In nightmare difficulty, you can bring a monster down to 33% HP. And in hell difficulty, you can bring a monster down to 50% HP. Well, this is BS. This is actually bullcrap. It doesn't actually do this. So this is actually only if the monster is at 0% resistance or higher. And when you bring a monster down below 0% resistance, and if you bring them all the way down to negative 100% resistance, for instance, if you can bring a monster down to negative 100%, then the actual figures are 1% for normal difficulty, again, because that doesn't change. I can't remember what the Nightmare one, I'd have to go back over it and check. Most people don't AXP a Nightmare anyway, but the Hell one actually goes down to 25% HP, which means that the monster's HP can actually go down to 25%. So if you are setting up a character who has, say for instance, Conviction or Lower Resistance, and you can bring down the monster's resistance even further, like for instance if you're a Conviction Paladin with negative 150% resistances, you tag that up with your 65% and the monster will be at negative 100, which means that when the monsters are affected by Conviction and Static Field at the same time on this particular character, they will be brought down to 25% HP, not 50%. Which is massive. When you're fighting a boss or anything, it doesn't matter what it is. If you have this setup with the negative resistance and you're utilizing enough negative resistance in other forms, you literally can bring them down to 25% HP. Now, there are some awkward interactions with the way that Conviction and some other things affect the total, and so it can vary. It actually varies between 25 to 50%, and there's actually a big old chart that you can pull up and you can find this information on. But suffice it to say, when you have a mercenary spamming a 20-yard static field with enough negative resistances, pretty much everything within range is going to be around 25 to 50% HP basically constantly for you, and then you can basically kill everything from there. It makes it a lot easier for a lot of different characters. Like if you're a Necromancer, you can of course utilize that to get your corpse explosions to dish out less number of corpse explosions per attack. That's kind of like a whole thing. And of course, if you are a Necromancer, you can still set this guy up for utility. So you could put say a Last Wish on him or something. You could throw a Bramble on him so he has the Thorns aura, and then maybe you could even toss something on his head for another aura, like it would be like a Cure helmet, so you can get like a free cleansing aura in addition, right? And then he still has 19.3 yard static field with all of this, which makes him a very powerful utility character. If you're a sorceress that already has static field, well then you don't care, right? You don't care about that crap. But if you are a character who needs help with bringing down the HP of monsters on a regular basis, bosses on the regular basis, this is a pretty powerful character. And you also get the lightning damage that he dishes out, and you get the charge bolts, which is actually really good at close range. So for those of you who are unaware of how this works, basically charge bolts can dish out massive amount of damage individually, but when you attack together, so for instance this is 131 damage, so if we run this on a calculator, it's 131 times 24, which is 3,144 damage per shot. And then you also have to take into account his faster cast rate, which is in this particular case, he's sitting at the 12 frame breakpoint, which means he can basically get off 2 casts per second. So we multiply that by 2, which means he's doing about 6,288 per cast of charged bolt, which is really nothing. That's actually pretty darn good. It's not bad, especially when you consider his lightning is only 2,805. So his charged bolt is actually going to do a lot more than his lightning if he's in close range, which does require you to kind of teleport him on top of things. He's a lot weaker than the ice version, and unfortunately that's just due to the fact that he has relatively low armor. Even with the Eth Hagens, the Eth Griffin's Eye, the Eth Spirit, he's still only sitting at 2,963, which is acceptable for a caster class, honestly. That doesn't have any kind of defense bonuses, but it's still not enough to keep him from getting slaughtered if he gets stuck in, unfortunately in combat. Personally, I think that the Act 3 mercenaries are absolutely amazing utility creatures, and if you utilize them properly for the utility that they're for, the lightning version obviously for the incredible static field, the fire version for the incredible ability to apply enchant, and of course the ice version for its crowd control, they actually do function as very effective allies. I do find that they tend to work better with characters that are already focused around reducing resistances. So, like, if you're a character that wants amp damage and you want Decrepify, it's probably not going to be the best character for you, because to get the most out of these, you really want a character that is going to be focusing around things like Conviction and lower resistance, elemental damage, like a Vengeance Paladin, a Fist of the Heavens Paladin that is using, like, actually using Conviction, a lower resistance like Plague, like Poison Necromancer. Maybe you're an elemental damage character like an elemental Mosaic Sin that's also utilizing, say, Plague Claw. Well, actually, no, you wouldn't use Plague Claw with a Mosaic Sin, but I used to use Plague Claws on my sins before Mosaic. Trap Sins could probably also get good use out of this because, of course, they also have their own access to characters like this. Maybe even, honestly, a Javazon that is. Hmm. Hmm. Trying to think of a couple different options, but I mean, honestly, it really comes down to the fact is, are you dishing out elemental damage, and can you support an elemental damage character? Do you need a tank? Because if you need a tank, these are not it. They're not going to help you tank. Like, if you can't tank the monsters, they're not going to be able to tank the monsters for you. And so it really kind of rules out a lot of classes that are caster based with no tanks of their own. Um, I mean, the druid could probably do it because the druid, of course, has access to the bear, and the bear is a very good tank. The Amazon could most likely do it because the Amazon has access to the Valkyrie, and the Valkyrie is a very good tank. The sorceress probably can't utilize these guys effectively, and probably wouldn't want to anyway, because the sorceress has access to enchant, and the sorceress has access to static field, and so neither of those things are all that enticing to the sorceress. Like the paladin, it's very enticing. The barbarian, it's actually pretty nice too, because the barbarian can usually tank just fine, and the paladin can usually tank just fine, if that makes any sense. I mean, a lot of these items just go to waste anyway, like FK Hagen's and Eth Griffin's Eye. I mean, most people don't really utilize any of these anyway. Eth Griffin's Eye is really only useful for your mercenary, because anybody who has a Griffin's Eye is going to want to put a lightning facet in it. And as soon as you have an ethereal Griffin's Eye, well, you can't put a lightning facet in it. You're stuck with a Zod rune, essentially, if you want to put it on your actual head, which makes it inferior to basically even a crappy Griffin's Eye. Like, even, let me put it this way, even if it was a perfect ethereal Griffin's Eye, you still have to put a Zod rune in it, and you can't put a 5/5 facet, which means that even a inferior, not perfect, non-ethereal Griffin's Eye is still going to be superior to an ethereal Griffin's Eye. So there's pretty much no other purpose other than to put it on a character like this. I think that's pretty much it for this particular character. There's a lot of fun things that you can potentially do with these guys, and I don't even think I've fully explored all of the available like things that you can do with the Act 3 mercenaries. The really cool thing about the Act 3 mercenaries, though, is you really only need one. Like, if you have one enchant merc and you have one static field merc in a group of 8 people, then you have enchant for everybody, because the enchant merc will enchant everyone and everything within range, which is insane, including minions, including other players, including other mercenaries. And if you have the static field mercenary, or the static field merc, well, then he's going to be static fielding the entire screen all the time anyway whenever you're around. So if you have 2 of these in a group, it's extremely effective. Especially if one of them is running cleansing, which everybody loves. Somebody's got the bramble merc, then everybody has thorns. And of course, if one of them is the fire, then you also get the fire aura. And just simply, I mean, think about it from this perspective. In a group of 8 players, if you had, let's say, 2 of these mercenaries. So let's just say somebody has the fire and somebody has the lightning, right? So the fire is going to have access to, let's say, cleansing, fire resistance aura, enchant. All right, and then let's say the lightning one, maybe it's being run by a physical necromancer, and he's got last wish, so he's got might. He also has bramble on the because he wants the thorns aura. And then he also has, I don't know, I'm not really sure what else he would throw on this particular character, but maybe he also has cleansing. Maybe he's running like a cure helmet on the top. And then, of course, you also get static field. So if you were running 2 of these guys, you would have a total of cleansing for the entire group, fire res aura for the entire group. You would have enchant for the entire group. You would also have might for the entire group, thorns for the entire group, and you would also have static field for the entire group, which would be constantly being cast whenever within range of monsters, right? Which is a pretty hefty amount of things that is basically just going on for the entire group. And granted, cleansing is defensive, fire aura is defensive, and thorns is sort of defensive, but also offensive at the same time. But enchant, might, thorns, and static field are all offensive, which means you have a pretty effective group here. And then, of course, you can also have other people in the group, like if you got Act 2 Mercs with your, let's say they're running Insight and they have Holy Freeze or Insight and Blessed Aim and so forth and so on. And you can stack on the auras relatively quickly and relatively fastly to the point where you literally have got like an insane level of defense and offense going on at the same time between the two. And everybody's going to love the Enchant Merc. All of the melee characters and even the casters, like necromancers, minion druids, and even the casters are going to like it because it's going to give their mercenaries more attack rating as well. So you're going to get a really nice like 400 to like 455% increased AR, which is really nice. And then of course everybody also gets fire damage as well, which might not be a lot of fire damage, but over everybody in the group adds up to a pretty large amount of damage. They're just really fun and really utility-based characters that are chosen for a very specific purpose. Like, do you need static field? Yes. Do you need enchant? Yes. Like, do you need auras? Yes. You could potentially get all these same auras from an Act 2 mercenary, right? So if you got the Might Merc, and then you threw like an Infinity on, you have like Might and Infinity at the same time. And Infinity also reduces defense, which is also interesting. But like you could have a Blessed Aim Merc with Infinity, and you could have your friend running an Enchant Merc with, like a Last Wish or something. And, then you've got literally everything that you want at the same time. You've got your Might aura, you've got your Conviction aura, you've got your Blessed Aim aura, you've got your whatever it is that you're trying to run. It's actually pretty impressive. One thing that they can't do is Insight, so they can't run Insight, which means that you don't get your mana regeneration. So if you are like a slave addict to those blue potions and you got those blue lips, I mean, there's really not much I can do about that. You're just going to have to deal with your blue lips and go with, go with an Inside Merc. My advice on that, though, is that, honestly, there's a lot of better ways that you can set up characters to avoid having to need an Inside Merc, and just avoid it entirely. My suggestion is, especially with Insight, is that Insight, while it is a very interesting item and it's a very nice crutch, even for early game, once you get your character fully set up, it's usually recommended to set your character up so you don't need an Insight Merc constantly. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers everything. If you have any questions about the Act 3 Mercenary, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Hopefully I've gone over everything that you need to know, but if I haven't, feel free to ask. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos. Be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. And as always, keep watching.